I don't think Carl had a vision of people as being, Sagan had a vision of this sort of great mass of empty vessels out there into which science must be poured by experts. On the other hand, I do think that I do have some sympathy with Owen Flanagan's point about, you know, if you've got expertise, let's use it. So the challenge here is to find out where's the balance, it seems to me. I mean, how do you engage an audience? How do you get more people to understand that science rocks and that they should know some more about it? And so we've already got people primed here. John Haidt?
Okay, yes, I have a question which is basically a follow-up on exactly what you just said. For Chris and Sheril primarily, stories about the decline of anything in America are often relative to a sort of an unnatural high point in the past. So this golden age or a previous time when people looked at scientists very positively reflects a time during the Cold War when scientists, of course, were part of our battle against an external enemy. And what's happened since then is, of course, the external enemy has gone, and the internal division, the culture war, has taken its place, and science is now on one side versus the other. So my question to you guys is, can you think of some way to basically use this sort of tribal moral psychology that we have, basically, you know, let's get some external enemy where science can help us fight it, or at least reduce the internal divisions?
It's a great question, and actually we just wrote the rough draft form, the end of our book, which tries to address this, and we say that, you know, even if you had all the media coverage of science that you want to have, would that really equal the 50s, because science at that time was part of the national mission, okay? How would you restore that? And the thing that we came up with was the energy issue. Basically, take up the charge to remake the energy system. It's a scientific mission. It's incredibly urgent, and the economy and the world depend upon it. And if we associate that with the scientific community's endeavors, then we're starting to reconnect it with what America needs. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah, but there's no person on the other side. Morality requires opponents who are agents, not so global warming, energy shortages. Those aren't very good enemies.
Well, but the pump is an enemy.
Psychologically speaking.
You know, the gas station is an enemy. That's the best I can do.
Let's try to do better.
Yeah.
Walter.
I have a question for Tony. And this, I guess my take on psychology, I don't know if I have any evidence for this, but it seems like you can, it's difficult to get people to believe things when you're asking them to make radical changes in their lifestyle and you offer no hope for anything better. So you can't even get people to look at pictures of factory farming of animals because they want their steak, right? And it's not clear that, you know, that any option is being offered that they like. I mean, tofu just doesn't do it for them. And so I think part of the problem here is that we see things like, you know, we want more money. Why? So we can document our planet's destruction. Well, I'm sorry, if that's all we're doing, I'm not sure I'm going to give you any money, right? Or, you know, so we can know how much time we have left. I don't know that I'd like to know how much time we have left. If that's all we're doing. It seems to me if science wants to get the public to listen and pay attention and really study, they've got to say, and we're going to be working to solve the problem this way. We're going to, you know, put technology into you know, alternative sources, and there really is a hope in this area, and we want the money to do something about it, not to document the planet's destruction. I mean, that's just really a comment. I'm not sure that there's a question there, but it does seem to me that if we're going to get people to listen to science, we've got to show how much science can help, how it can provide a candle in the dark.
I'll just respond. The document, The Planet's Destruction, was supposed to be a joke, and I'm sorry it didn't come across that way. I am an optimist. I think we're going to solve this problem. Most of the reason is that, you know, I just greeted our 45 PhD students who are starting at Scripps, and they're unafraid of this. You know, they're going to work on algae biofuels and you know, ocean energy and all kinds of things. You know, they're not lamenting the bad hand that our generation has given them. They just think it's a task. And you know, just to reflect on the morning session, when I think of my own happiness And how can I be happy given the fact that there's this cloud of CO2 over us? It's because it's a challenge. I want to get out there every day and beat this damn issue. And that's what our 22-year-old, PhD graduates really do think. And they have a life ahead of them and an inspiration and a creativity to do it. So, it's a lesson for me not to be too ironical or Australian when I speak to you, that you think I really want to document the planet's destruction, although that's, what many of my political friends complain to me that I'm doing. But I think there's great hope. I think there's a reality. And if I had more time, I would try and analyze, why is the UK so different than the USA? It may be that Margaret Thatcher has a master's degree in chemistry and instantly understood the perils of global warming, and so it never became a left-right issue.
And if I may just touch on that too, when we're talking specifically about fisheries, it's not so much, okay, we'll eat some tofu, because that's not realistic. But I think there are emerging markets with new opportunities. I mean, we are a changing planet. We've always been a changing planet. It's not that we're just going to level zero. The reason I worked on sea cucumbers is because when all the big species were fished out of the Gulf of Maine, sea cucumbers became an emerging market to ship overseas, which does create new jobs, which does affect people. So you can really harness some of that and look for new hope. And then hopefully, even out the biomass in other ways.
Roger just handed me the mic and said elitism, so I take it you want some outburst of elitism from him. Happily, I can respond. So I think I should just respond briefly to some of the chastisement I heard in Chris and Sheril's.
It was just me.
Lecture, yes. The first thing is that I have always acknowledged that there's a role for different voices in this, and I don't think everyone should necessarily adopt my posture with respect to religion. It would be easier that way, but I'm realistic that that's not going to happen. But I just want to, by analogy, talk for a moment about the cost we pay for not calling a spade and not pointing to the frank delusion that goes by the name of faith, and trying to be more conciliatory in the sense that you're recommending. No one is tempted to talk this way about witchcraft. Witchcraft, like religion, is a cultural universal. We have basically stamped out a belief in witchcraft in the West, so that you no longer hear of people getting diagnoses of demonic possession and not seeing neurologists, etc. And when you do hear of such a thing, it's considered to be frank child abuse, and people are prosecuted. But if you go to Africa, if you go to Angola, there's a belief in witchcraft is ubiquitous, and the belief that children can be witches is ubiquitous. And there's a pandemic of child witches being tortured and being rendered homeless in Angola in particular, but throughout Africa. No one is tempted in our culture to accommodate that based on the ancient pedigree of belief in witchcraft and the efficacy of spellcasting and all of that. And you could line up people as far as the eye could see who could tell you how they need witchcraft, how important it is in their lives. So my point is that religion has many of the liabilities of witchcraft. I think some of them are quite worse when you talk about apocalyptic Christianity and Islam. Your energy solution, I agree with your energy solution. I spoke about that in my first book, that we need a Manhattan Project to render oil useless. But the person standing on the other side of that moral chasm is not just the pump. It is these mostly Islamic despotisms that are able to just pull their wealth out of the ground and have no burden upon them to develop functional intellectual societies. And so, anyway, those are my elitist noises.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the energy issue at the end, because, of course, what we have on that is we have evangelicals mobilizing to create concern among their own members about global climate change, and that's actually an important trend in the evangelical community, and they're defining the mission to deal with protecting the environment in the context of biblical stewardship, which is a message that resonates for them. And this, the question to me is, do you really want to alienate those enemies when the planet is at stake? No. Not in the context of American politics, no. That's all I would say.
Let me to make a comment about science and politics and the society, bringing science to society. Since I'm new to this group, let me introduce myself in 10 seconds. My name is Eshel Ben Jacob. I was the president of the Israel Physical Society, so we were involved in trying to make attempts like the attempts that you're making, and the Inter-Senate Committee in Israel to bring the attention of the government science. I agree with what you said, but I think that one thing which I missed is that one has to start much earlier. Much earlier, I mean in preschool even, school, and then high schools. Both in terms of classes and in terms of the media programs. We forgot about the programs that kids watch. And they have less selection on one hand, and the second hand is that parents can have some guidance to what they do watch and what they don't watch. So this is one comment. The other comment is that we forgot also the role of the scientist. Scientists, sometimes we are very reluctant we feel that this is making the science cheap. If we try to make the science, or the science that we are doing, and bringing it into the attention of the public in a popular way. So there are many scientists that are very reluctant, and there are many scientists that if someone, a scientist, a colleague, is successful in doing it, they have some bad feeling about the way that he's doing it. It's like playing the science cheap. So this is the fault of the scientists. And the last comment is that you are right, you mentioned it, that post-Second World War, there was a flourish in the interests of the public and politician and society at large. Also, we forgot the role of people that make the money, that if they are interested in science, it makes an impact. But it was because the feeling of society was that it's directly related to this existence issue of every person, existential issues. So I agree with you completely that bringing back the energy issue can again draw the attention of the society and bringing global warming. But when we do go to the public, many times, and that reflects in the views, I think, in the polls about global warming, we bring out the question if it is man-made or natural fluctuations, to what extent it is man-made. We pay less attention trying to explain people in a very simple way what could be the consequences, and say, okay, not let's argue to what extent it is man-made, which is important, because if we want to take measures to limit the production of CO2, but at the same time to have some unification and give some hope, like was mentioned here, that we can find ways to adapt to the problem or to solve or to reverse it. So this is just adding to the things that you mentioned.
But what do you do if you want to sell a program? What do you do?
Well, I just want to first wholeheartedly agree with what I call it the cringe factor, but how academia often feels about engaging in public policy. It's a huge problem, and I've known personally, and you hear stories of so many scientists who think about doing one of these AAAS fellows, a Sea Grant fellowship like I did, and ultimately opt out because they're afraid, first, by not publishing during that 1 to 2 year period, and then secondly, what their colleagues will think of them coming through the process on the other side. Will they be advocates? And Jeremy Jackson, who I'm sure you know, is one of the best marine scientists, marine conservation voices we have in the world right now, and there are people who sort of object to that because he does take a position on a lot of issues which are very important. So I think we need to, as you said, start changing some of the perspectives on those individuals. And just an anecdote to add, I had run into Sam Farr earlier this year. He is one of the greatest ocean champions from California, a congressman. And he said to me, you know, he always has a Sea Grant fellow as well, and I wasn't in his office, but I'm friendly with his former Sea Grant fellow, Latisse Hauser. And what he said was, you know, I don't understand. All of these wonderful scientists come through my office, and then they never go back into science. he didn't mean that that they're not doing any research at all. But I think what he meant is once they get the bug, once they see what their work, what their professional career can do on an application level, they're often less inclined to go back and only be doing research, only be working in the lab. But we need more people to have that experience, and we need to encourage that in the ivory towers and in discussions, in TV, in the people that we show to young people coming through the science pipeline to the other side.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, that's why we still have to grapple with the Carl Sagan problem. The history of the popularization of science in America in the last 50 years is the history of tension between trying to reach broader audiences coming from the scientific community and then getting brushed back by scientists themselves who say you're simplifying. And so we're trying to, we want to reach people, but no, you can't. You can't do it like that. And so we retreat, and then we advance, and then we retreat. There has to be some sort of accommodation of the idea that it's not going to be comprehensive scientific information as we get beyond the scientific community, and sort of a détente between the tutting experts and the aspiring communicators.
There is a moral perhaps to be drawn from the fact that some of the voices in the debate, in particular, for example, the religious lobby in the United States, is very well funded, very well organized. It's got radio programs and television programs, and most of its resources go to propagandizing its message. And the science organizations, science departments and universities just don't do that with their resources because they funnel them into research. And when a piece of very important, significant research comes out, the scientists who produced it tend to think that it just speaks for itself. Put it in front of a congressman or something, it'll be self-explanatory, and it isn't. So, maybe the moral there is that professional scientific bodies and universities need to allocate just some of their resources a bit to the public understanding remit. I mean, in the United Kingdom, there are two professors of public understanding of science.
Leon Lederman.
This is just want to add an anecdote that I think is an important one. We have a congressman in Illinois who is a physicist. He spent 20 years doing high-level research at Fermilab. And before that, he had been an inventor and a businessman and started a business which made him very comfortable. That's a special advantage. And a year ago or so, he decided he wanted to run for Congress. And with a leave of absence, he spent some time in a congressional office learning how to do this. He then engaged a polling firm to look at the area he's in, and our area is rock rib Republican. They elected a dying congressman, who died about a week after he was elected, because he was rock rib Republican. Our district was the district of Dennis Hastert, who was the House Majority Leader, and very, very conservative. Anyway, Mr. Foster ran for the finishing of Hastert's term. In March, he was elected. Running as a Democrat, as a scientist, and as a businessman. What he's able to do in Congress is just absolutely mind-boggling, because he knows science. I mean, there are a few medical people in Congress. There's two other physicists, but their grasp of what's going on in science has been weakened by their long stay in the Congress. Foster is always surrounded by congressmen after a discussion. There was a discussion about the nuclear budget. There were discussions which had to do with directly with science and sometimes indirectly with science. And his authority on this has been awesome. And this reminds me that some 120 years ago, when I was a graduate student, my mentor, his name was I.I. Rabi, probably one of the founders of American physics, urged his students. He said, look, he says, go have some fun, get some experiments done, and then run for office. Because power is in the hands of the people who are elected, not the advisors. And he was an advisor. He was an advisor to Eisenhower. And I remember that, and I think it's not an easy thing to do. Not many good scientists are able to cope in a congressional atmosphere. But boy, if we could get 3 or 4 more such scientists in the House and a couple in the Senate, it would change things, because the congressmen really want to do well, often, sometimes, hopefully, and having close advice by an elected person is awesomely powerful.
Absolutely, 100% amen.
Yeah.
Would anyone here like to help start a science PAC?
We want to start a science PAC. Rich people supporting the campaigns of people who care about science, not the science institutions, the rich people.
Yeah, on the last point, I think that you in this country have got a lot to learn from the UK, that our upper house is hereditary, more or less, and is appointed, and we don't have the dual system of one party against another. Of course there is one party there and another party, but we also have crossbenchers who are not aligned with either the government or the opposition. And I think that's the secret for getting scientists who are not taking a party line into positions of government. And I think it's the one good feature of our parliamentary system that I think your Congress lacks.
I just wanted to sort of comment on the historical story and some thoughts. First of all, it's easy to be nostalgic about the Sputnik period, but when I was researching a column, I don't know, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, about scientists portrayed in literature and popular culture, one of the things I came across was this article in Science in, I believe it was in 1957, but I wouldn't bet my life on it, but somewhere around there, by Margaret Mead and a colleague, and it was about how high school students perceived scientists. And basically nobody wanted to be a scientist because they were weird, but they all said we'd be living in caves if it weren't for scientists. So there was this great appreciation of scientists are wonderful, but they're really odd ducks. They're either working all the time or they're never working, or they don't have, they were, there was not a sense that everybody should be a scientist. But the longer term, listening to Chris, I was thinking, well, okay, I knew about this Margaret Mead thing, and I knew that even in the 50s and early 60s, when we think about science being very popular, and a lot of people didn't think so highly necessarily of scientists as people. But I was thinking, well, when was science popular? Was it popular in the 19th century? Well, no, I mean, basically, there was this brief time in the 18th century among a certain elite where scientists were popular and science was a great thing. But I also wanted to caution, I mean, there's a great deal of self-congratulation. We're all good liberals, and, I would consider myself on the classical side of that, but, and all the enemies are always conservatives and fundamentalists and people who voted for George Bush. But, conservative fundamentalists did not write Frankenstein. There is also and I'm old enough to remember the backlash against science in the late 60s and early 70s, and it did not primarily come from the right. There's a very deep romantic strain which exists very prominently on the left, and right now they've come together because the romantics can say, technology is bad because it's destroying the planet, and the people who like science can say, well, science is good and it helps us understand why the planet is in danger, and so they're in alliance. But that's not always the case. There is an Enlightenment sort of pro-science point of view that battles not just against religion, but against this very strong romantic strand in Western culture that came out of, was literally a backlash against the Enlightenment and then against industrialization. And I think to leave that out of any sort of intellectual argument, you miss things that are beyond the next 4 years.
I don't disagree with you if you look at Hollywood. Well, the 50s is a different point, but if you look at Hollywood depictions, mad scientists, I mean, obviously they're coming out of that tradition, and this is an issue of two cultures of literary heritage versus scientific heritage clashing in the entertainment industry, and it's not a necessarily a right-left kind of thing. I don't mean to suggest that it is. I think that the big enemies politically of science in the last 8 years are clearly coming from the right because the Bush administration was so powerful. Does that mean that it's always going to be that way, that it's been that way in every single country? No. I mean, none of those things are true, but it's presently been the big problem. If we think about the long-term influence of science, we're going to have to take into account a lot of other kinds of political and not political factors, like the complete change in the nature of the media over the last 50 years.
We are running a bit late, so we'll just take one more, maybe. By the way, just to remind you, the Romanticism and the dark satanic mills and so on, look at the poster again. It's got Billy Blake all over it. So, Beatrice?
This ties within several of the recent comments. I think that portraying this as a partisan issue is unnecessary, counterproductive, and wrong. It's counterproductive in that it will alienate some of the allies that you need the most and unnecessarily. And it's wrong because I can certainly point to certain domains in which the left has traditionally been hostile to evidence when it goes against their social agendas. In the most recent administration, we have an administration that is particularly strong in terms of its willingness to have potent conflict of interests that tend to align it with the issues that we've talked about today. But I do think it's a dreadful mistake to portray this as a partisan issue.
Will we pick this up this afternoon a little bit later? I think people are getting hungry at this point. We need to recharge our energy sources.